The mob after the passing of Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino, the Mafia boss known for his frail appearance, single-mindedness, ruthlessness, and tough as nails, was the most powerful crime boss in American history. He is the main reason for the rise of this mob family, but the Gambino family is doing well even after his death following his footprints. How are they managing the entire family after the death of the Godfather? Carlo Gambino, the American Mafia's most powerful and respected don from the late 1950s until his death peacefully of natural causes in 1976, was small in stature, with a prominent nose and sporting an almost permanent friendly grin used to disarm detractors. Gambino, known for his quiet, understated demeanor and razor-sharp criminal savvy, was a teenage hitman in Sicily who was allegedly made into the Mafia overseas before coming to the United States in 1921 at the age of 19 and working for cousins connected to gangland factions in New York. His cousins worked for East Coast Prohibition-era mob boss Salvatore Toto de Aquila, for whom he also went to work right away. When rival gangster Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria killed D'Aquila in 1928, Gambino switched his allegiance to the Masseria gang, which fought a 4-year war for underworld supremacy in New York against Salvatore Maranzano, a crime boss from a different part of Sicily than Masseria and Gambino. Masseria and Maranzano were gone by the end of the war, killed in ambushes, and the modern-day American Mafia was formed. Gambino went on to become an original member of one of the 5 La Cosa Nostra crime families in New York, the one belonging to Vincent Mangano and eventually named after him. Gambino was convicted of operating an illegal liquor still in the 1930s and spent nearly 2 years in federal prison, the only time he would ever serve time behind bars. On the orders of Mangano's underboss, Albert Anastasia, Mangano and his brother Philip were murdered on the same day in 1951, and 6 years later, in the fall of 1957, Gambino himself organized Anastasia's murder and took command of the crime family for the next 19 years. Carlo Gambino became the boss of the Gambino crime family after Anastasia died. Agnello Della Croce took over as underboss in 1965, succeeding Joseph Biondo. Gambino and Luciano are then accused of providing a portion of the $100,000 paid to a Puerto Rican drug dealer to falsely implicate Genovese in a drug deal. Genovese was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison in April 1959, where he died in 1969. The Gambino family was named after Carlo Gambino at the time of the McClellan hearings in 1963, when the structure of organized crime was first brought to public attention. Gambino quickly established the Gambino crime family as the most powerful in the United States. Meyer Lansky's offshore gaming houses in Cuba and the Bahamas aided him, a lucrative business for the Cosa Nostra. Although federal and state authorities had been looking for him for years, his privacy and evasion thwarted their efforts. Finally, in 1969, he was charged with plotting an armed robbery and truck hijacking. Legal wranglings dragged on for several years, during which time Gambino's wife died and his health deteriorated. When federal authorities discovered that Gambino had never become a citizen of the United States and had instead been smuggled into the country, they initiated deportation proceedings against him. His doctors claimed that his heart problems made him too weak to travel from the United States to Italy, and his case was repeatedly delayed, amid rumors that the Gambino family had paid off 2 U.S. senators to help delay the proceedings. Carlo Gambino struggled with health issues in his later years, dying of heart disease on October 15, 1976, at his Long Island waterfront house while watching the Yankees play on television. Before his death, Gambino controversially replaced his number 2 in command, Della Croce, with his brother-in-law, Castellano, putting his syndicate on shaky ground in the years that followed. Della Croce's death from lung cancer in early 1985, combined with Castellano's decision to skip his underboss's wake, resulted in a Gambino clan coup in which Gotti staged the murders of Castellano and his right-hand man, Tommy Bellotti, on a crowded Manhattan street in front of the popular Sparks Steakhouse, and took control of the crime family by force. Gotti promoted Angelo Ruggiero and Sammy Gravano to capo and named Frank DeCicco underboss. With an annual income of $500 million at the time of his takeover, the Gambino family was regarded as the most powerful American Mafia family. Gotti was known as the Dapper Don for his hand-tailored suits and silk ties. Unlike his colleagues, Gotti made little effort to conceal his mob connections and was willing to provide the media with interesting sound bites. But mob leaders from other families were offended by the Castellano murder and disliked Gotti's public persona. Gotti's most powerful enemy was former Castellano ally and Genovese crime family boss Vincent the Chin Gigante. On December 11, 1990, FBI agents and NYPD detectives raided the Ravenite Social Club and arrested Gravano, Gotti, and Locascio. Gravano pleaded guilty to a superseding racketeering charge, and Gotti was charged with 5 murders: conspiracy to murder Gaetano Vastola, loan sharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery, and tax evasion. On December 14, 1992, Gotti surrendered to federal authorities to begin serving his prison sentence. Gravano was sentenced to 5 years in prison by a federal judge on September 26, 1994. Gotti continued to rule the family from prison, while capos John Jackie Nose D'Amico and Nicholas Little Nick Carrozzo took over day-to-day operations. The latter was supposed to take over as acting boss, but he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for racketeering. John Jr. Gotti, Gotti's son, took over as family head, but he pled guilty to racketeering in 1999 and was sentenced to 77 months in prison. They all eventually were convicted and imprisoned for the crime. Peter Gotti took control of the family sometime before his brother John Gotti died in prison on June 10, 2002. With Peter Gotti in charge, the family's fortunes have dwindled to a remarkable extent, given their power a few decades ago when they were considered the most powerful criminal organization in America. Peter Gotti was imprisoned in 2003, and the leadership allegedly passed to administration members Nicholas Carrozzo, Jackie D'Amico, and Joseph Carrozzo. But Peter Gotti remained the official boss while in prison. Gotti's opponents regained control of the family, owing largely to the fact that the rest of Gotti's loyalists were either imprisoned or under indictment. Mikey Scars de Leonardo, the former head of the family's white-collar operations and one of the last Gotti supporters, turned state's evidence as a result of increased law enforcement pressure and credible evidence to be presented in his racketeering trial, as well as the administration shelving him for stealing money from the family. He chose to testify against members of all 5 families. When the entire Gambino family hierarchy was arrested by federal and New York state authorities in early 2008, a 3-man panel of street bosses Danny Marino, John Gambino, and Bartolomeo Vernace took control of the Gambino family while the administration members were in prison. Domenico Cefalù was promoted to acting boss of the crime family in July 2011, effectively ending the Gotti reign. However, according to crime reporter Jerry Capecci, Cefalù stepped down in 2015 and his underboss Frank Cali took control. However, a week later, Capecci issued a correction, stating that Cefalù was still the acting boss. The family was thought to have between 150 and 200 members, as well as over 1,100 associates. The family remained involved in various criminal enterprises, including gambling, loan sharking, extortion, labor racketeering, fraud, money laundering, and narcotics trafficking. In 2012, the Gambino family retained some control over peers in Brooklyn and Staten Island through infiltrated labor unions. Indictments from 2008 to 2014 revealed that the family was still very active in New York City. Many important members of the Gambino crime family were released from prison in 2009. However, this did not last long. A lone gunman shot and killed Frank Cali outside his home on Staten Island on March 13, 2019. Cali's murder was the first since Paul Castellano was assassinated in 1985. 3 days later, 24-year-old Anthony Camello was arrested and charged with the murder. Authorities reportedly believe the crime was related to a personal dispute, rather than any organized crime activity. Following Cali's death, Lorenzo Menino was announced as the new Gambino leader. More than 40 years after Gambino's death, the New York crime family is still named for him. Although decimated by the federal crackdown during the Gotti era, the Gambino family is still involved in various crime activities in Brooklyn and Staten Island. Unlike many other mobsters, Gambino maintained a low profile, staying out of the spotlight and living in a modest row house in Brooklyn. His frail, grandfatherly appearance made it difficult to believe that he was the single, most powerful organized crime figure in America at the time, and one of the most ruthless. The title character in the most critically acclaimed mob movie of all time, The Godfather, was inspired in part by Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino left a legacy second to none in the underworld. Today, blood relatives of his still operate in the Brigada that he built, and his name lives on in infamy through this family that is named after him to this very day, some 44 years after his death. And that's the end of the video. Don't forget to like it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.